Okay, we have our 11 a.m. item, 6.7, consideration of California Cannabis Authority membership compliance software. Supervisor Green.
Yes, thank you. And I see Mr. Turner in the audience. We'll have a seat here at the table for you. And if you have any PowerPoints, the clerk will be able to assist you. I brought this item forward because since I've joined the board, cannabis has been kind of a core issue since before I joined the board, and since I've joined the board, I'm just interested in how our system is working, and if there's any gaps, what can we do to address them? And in doing my research, and actually during my new supervisors training was the first time I got to meet Mr. Turner. During my training, schlepping a vendor table with all the other vendors there, and we've been talking ever since. And I think CCA has a good story to tell. I think its member counties are getting good value. I'm pitching definitely CCA membership. I am interested in the compliance software, and I understand there may be some price points or pain points and part of the larger discussion. But the main thing I wanted to do is just introduce Mr. Greg Turner with California Cannabis Authority, welcome him. I appreciate so much him driving up for our meeting today, and I believe he's going to have also some support from NCS a little bit later. So I don't want to drone on. I put a little information in the staff report, but mainly this is going to be a meet and greet. Mr. Turner, please tell us a little bit about CCA and how Lake County may be able to benefit if we hop on board.
I appreciate your time. My name is Greg Turner. I'm the Executive Director and Counsel to the California Cannabis Authority. We are a joint powers authority. We were created under the auspices of CSAC Finance Corp, really for the purpose of trying to help. This was about 5 years ago, just after the passage of 2016. Gosh, that seems like such a long time ago now. To try to find a way to leverage data to help counties and local governments generally deal with the legalization and commercialization of cannabis in California. If you're familiar with Prop 64, it establishes a requirement that the state create what we call a track and trace program. And the idea is to track cannabis from seed to sale. It's an ag product, but at the same time, it's also unique. What the voters passed in Prop 64 was actually a fairly complicated and robust regulatory environment. And the idea, and with a dual licensing system, that's the other unique aspect to cannabis in California, is that local governments have the ability to regulate and tax independently of the state. Of course, that is a significant onerous, as you probably all well know, and you're living with commercial cannabis over the last several years. And so really at the heart of the CCA's mission were two things. To try to create an environment in where we could leverage data for the benefit of counties and local governments more generally, but then also a collaborative environment where cannabis is best when there is cooperative efforts between local governments. I think one of the things we see right now in the marketplace is the movement of product between vertically integrated or at least related entities in and out of jurisdictions, trying to get access to data that helps identify that, helps with tax compliance, helps with regulations, helps with a larger view from a policy perspective. I think a lot of cannabis policy is made right now in a data-free environment. There's a lot of anecdotes that float around about what's going on in the marketplace, what's going on in the regulatory world, and what we're trying to do is bring data to that. We do that predominantly through our data analytics partner, NCS Analytics, who's on the line and ready to do a demo if that's of interest to the board. But that's sort of the backdrop to why we created a joint powers authority was because we needed a governmental entity. We wanted to also, at the time, we were a little bit more concerned with the federal government's activities in the cannabis arena. And so we created a JPA where counties are the members, they run the organization. And we thought that might give a bit of of a buffer to a more active federal government. Since then, obviously, the federal government's now trying to find a way to make legalization a pathway to legalization. And so, trying to think of, I've probably gone too fast. I don't want to take too much time, but I'll just go through and the organization itself. We, as an organization, we focus on data. We focus on more in recent years policy, collaborative efforts. What are different counties doing? We are endeavoring to try to include cities within the organization as well. They have a little bit different environment for the regulation and taxation of commercial cannabis, but at the same time, because of that interrelationship, that intermovement of product, become very important. Let's see if I can. Oh yeah, it does go. Sort of from a large scope perspective, what we have brought together is NCS is our data analytics partner. We've also brought in a group called the Cannabis Public Policy Consultants. They are an outside group that can help local governments from sort of soup to nuts in terms of looking at your cannabis program from a regulatory or tax perspective. What are the economics of your commercial cannabis program? What are your what's your programmatic regulation of cannabis look like? How can it be more efficient? They also do a lot of research, data-driven, survey-based research about what's going on in the marketplace. That I'm happy to provide you some of their research work. That is, I'll explain the pricing aspect of it in a minute. But so that's CPPC, Cannabis Public Policy Consultants, NCS that provides our analytics, and then that collaborative aspect of working with other counties and other local jurisdictions in their effort to regulate and tax commercial cannabis. This is sort of, I'll leave this behind. This sort of sums up the nature of what CCA is. If you're from the start of a regulatory program, or if you're looking at completely redoing your regulatory program, we have consultants that are available to help with that. We have the ability to look at what your tax measure is. I happen to be a state and local tax lawyer by background, and so we have the expertise to be able to help look at your tax ordinances, doing the economic analysis to anticipate what that will generate for the county over time, where there might be some holes in it, that sort of thing. And then looking at what you have already done, and then through a more active regulatory program through the analytics. So I've probably already droned on a little bit long. I mean, we've talked a number of times. How can I fill the hole? Would you like to see a demo of the platform from our provider to get a sense of the data that comes in from track and trace is really critical to being able to see what's going on in your commercial cannabis marketplace. It's more than simply, if you consider the track and trace program, what it does is it brings in transactions from cultivators through distributors, from the manufacturing to the dispensaries, into, I would call, a data lake. And what the analytics platform does is takes that data and makes it usable for the county. It gives you the ability to see into what's going on in your cultivators, for example. Is someone, are they reporting more waste than they ought to be doing? Or are they selling at a price that's substantially less than what you would expect given your marketplace, what other people are reporting? It really helps provide that kind of oversight to make it more efficient for the county. I think one of the things that we see a lot is the dedication, the time and resources that are necessary to dedicate staff time to go through that type of transactional data, to understand it, to analyze it, and then make use of it is intensive. What NCS really does is the platform itself helps identify what those anomalies are in the record, but then their staff actually helps educate your staff in terms of what it means. What does this mean in the context of this particular operator? They go through that transactional record on a weekly or bi-monthly or bi-weekly basis with staff to try to help them understand what's going on. And then obviously from that sort of insight into what's going on in the regulatory environment, we also provide then there are periodic reports that become available. We also do what we call the Transparency Project, which is a publicly facing portal that summarizes all of your commercial cannabis data into a publicly digestible, aggregated, anonymized data set, so they can see how many growers are going on. What are the price points in the county? We help counties with cultivation. Crop reports is pretty typical use as well. And so, you have a question?
No, I was just going to say, definitely I just want to clarify. So the agenda item today, he mentioned a couple things. So it's basically a full-service shop. And I did want to sing the praises of the consulting group. I did work with them a little bit to shape a possible proposal because we had a cannabis task force. And I still think that there could be value in having some support for that process as we get closer to really drilling down into the weeds of our regulatory ordinance and whether we need to change things up a little bit. I didn't bring that today because that has a price point. What I'm bringing today is a membership and a proposal to dive into this analytics platform. But I wanted to sing the praise of the policy group. I know they're out of Colorado. Colorado is about 2 calendar years ahead of California in legalization and several light years ahead in their ability to be nimble and adjust to this. So shout out to my Colorado peeps. If your gentleman is online, it might be a good time to go ahead and fire up that demo.
Yeah, well, I'll give him a notice as I introduce him. Adam, if you can hear me, why don't you, thank you. All right, so Adam Crabtree is the CEO of NCS Analytics. He is both a recovering banker and a data nerd. Labels that he wears with pride. And we've been working closely together, and he likes showing off his analytics platform because it is kind of sells itself. It's pretty impressive. But more importantly is his team. The team behind him has been really beneficial to our members in helping them understand their industry. So with that, Adam, why don't you kick off and show us a quick demo of what the platform looks like.
Yeah, of course. Thank you all for your time. I greatly appreciate this. We're going to keep it fairly high level in the out of respect for time. Basically, a lot of what we do is help support the regulatory effort by bringing this data in. You're in a fully masked environment that'll allow me to show some of this off. But essentially what we do is we make it to you can take a peek in any one of the many businesses that are out there in your county at any given time. That data refreshes itself every few hours. The alerts go off once a day. And essentially what you're looking at here is the individual business, LLC, or license, the parent or holding company. This becomes particularly important out there in California, where we see multiple cultivation licenses on the same piece of ground. The system is actually able to determine whether it's activity happening within a company, outside of a company, and treat it accordingly. State license is pretty self-explanatory, as is location type. This last section is really why we get hired. We currently monitor just shy of 20,000 cannabis businesses across the country for our regulatory partners. Obviously, CCA is one of those. Where the efficiency comes in is out of that 60 to 100 million data points we ingest each week, we break it down into what really matters, your 5s and your 4s, all the way down to, hey, this is going on, not a huge concern, but we wanted to make you aware of it. All of this data is sortable, searchable, controllable by about any parameter you want, whether you want to see what happened in the last 7 days all the way to where things are going up to 90 days ago. If we go into one of these businesses, we'll go in and more bang for the buck, where let's look at a handful of cultivation licenses at the same time. What you're seeing here, they had 31 alerts go up. That's why we've got a little frowny face, but we're actually going to look at 23 cultivators at the same point in time. So while this does tell us how they're selling compared to last year, what their sales breakdowns are, how their individual licensees are reporting their revenue. But down here, if this was an indoor cultivator with 20 licenses, When you walk in, or an outdoor cultivator, when you walk in, you'd see 41,000 live plants. About 29,000 of those are flowering, 11,000 and change are vegging. They've chopped down about 52,000, packaged up 94,000 babies, and destroyed 10,000 plants. From there, it breaks out each of those individual licenses to where you can see whether it's which duct tape square in that indoor facility or which side of the irrigation road or access road you're on. But it makes it very easy to see when plants went in the ground, what phase of life they're at. Is everything going as we would expect? Are they spending the right time in the phases of life? Are we letting them grow for too long? Are we destroying too many? As we keep moving, we get into harvest activity. So how many harvests, how many plants? Do these all break down as we would expect? Is there the right amount of wet weight per plant? Is there the right ratios of waste and water and all of those other fun things that are important on the regulatory side of things? And then even what they're shipping, what they're making, who it's going to, byproduct category. If you want to dig in even deeper, we can actually see individual relationships. When you send it to one person, you charge this amount. But if we go down here and you sent the same product to a different person, it actually is charged a different amount. So helping to understand what is actually happening in this crazy industry, who they're buying from, who they're selling to, even what's sitting on site at any given time. So a lot of what we do is we just enable the access to that data. We have found that it makes the regulatory effort a heck of a lot more efficient, and it makes it easier for all parties involved to see. When we're looking at retailers and things like that, it's going to be more around pricing alerts, but it just makes it a heck of a lot easier. If we pick an easy example of a California specific rule like plant batches, where the regulations say there can only be 100 immature plants at any given time within a single batch. If we click on that, it takes us down to a pretty basic one that says, hey, on this date, they planted over that. We have hundreds, if not thousands, of different permutations of alerts at this point. Every one of them gives you a better idea of what's actually happening, where it says in the regulation, why this alert is going off, 3 to 5 associated questions, and then down actually where we're saying, hey, they planted more than the regulation allows. And so it just creates an efficiency. Instead of trying to wade through mountains and mountains of data, it makes it a lot easier to isolate out and see what's actually going on. The other aspect that we do is a lot on the education side. As Greg mentioned, that goes to my phenomenal team, but they actually get full access to a learning library that will walk through every aspect of the cannabis industry, from the impact of light to how to visualize various weights of cannabis. I'm not sure about you all, but I was not raised with the metric system. So understanding what you can visually see, to how things are manufactured and what the common extraction methods are. This is continuously updated. There are a number of alerts and reports and all sorts of fun things that go off, but as a way of kicking this off, just as a high level, it's meant to create efficiencies, make things easier, have a better communication with the industry. Greg mentioned the Transparency Project, which is CCA's version of that. You can drill into the various counties. You can see what products are being sold, the total sales analyzed. Currently in CCA's footprint as of June 1st, there were just shy of 2 million live plants. Since we're just a little bit into June, it's why we haven't seen any planting, because this was updated on the 1st. This actually updates itself every Wednesday automatically. Each county gets their own. If you so choose to use it, you can toss it on a website to where you're able to also convey to your constituents what's going on. This is a great way of seeing the market trends. Are we seeing more activity, less activity, and just a generalized way of conveying the crazy complicated nature of cannabis to the general public in a responsible manner that doesn't compromise anyone's privacy. I realize I talk pretty quick, but I'm also I'm trying to be mindful of time. Are there any questions or things that I could dig further into before turning this back over to Mr. Turner?
Just if it's fair, because some questions may come up a little bit later, definitely the early origin story of CCA and then this analytics, we're trying to figure out the marketplace, right? And so leveraging a metric to just tell us what's happening in real time is hugely valuable. But from a compliance standpoint, part of this may be more useful for tax compliance, for example, and some of it may be more useful for say, compliance involving permittees or something like that. So if there's a value proposition to be made, would you, as the manager of the software, say it's focused more on tax compliance, or can it have equal utility farther upstream?
I would say that some of our favorite clients actually use a task force model where we've got code, we've got cannabis, we've got tax, we've got typically someone from the sheriff or DA's office, and they all sit around the table because depending on what you're looking for, this is incredibly varied on what it can be used. Simple things like code enforcement and renewals can hop in and see what they're doing. Is everything going along the right lines? If there are more serious issues, it primes that data to be turned over for law enforcement or other referrals. And then obviously there is a tax component. So my favorite engagement, and my teams as well, is when we're sitting around the table with kind of the task force or a group of folks. And depending on which jurisdiction we're in, kind of varies, but I would say that it's multifaceted in all of our installments, whether it's in California or across the country.
Yeah, that's what I'd say. And the way it works really is one person is designated in the county as being the administrator of the account. And they identify the users. They sign a user agreement to make sure that the data is protected confidentially. And then they can have access. You can have one team leader be responsible for bringing reports to the team. But what we've seen, the most efficient approach has been the team approach, where you've got everybody from tax to code enforcement to law enforcement that are engaged in some form or fashion in the process. So, and one thing, the data real quick. I know this comes up sometimes from industry. When we originally, Supervisor Green, you mentioned we have a colorful history. When we started, it was prior to the state standing up their track and trace system. And so we because there were counties, our members, who were interested in doing their due diligence and regulating, we collected data directly from licensees on their behalf, and it was essentially a dual port. They would port to Metric and port to us. We don't do that anymore. It's too complicated. We recognize burden placed on industry, and we think actually one of the mission statements of CCA is to try to help the legal market become more efficient in its operations, which means we don't want to be a burden on the industry. We pull data directly from track and trace through what's called a commercial API. We have legislation to seek more direct access to the state's database so that we get a more holistic approach, more holistic view of the data statewide. And so we are pursuing that as well. But the whole idea is to try to minimize any sort of reporting obligations. So the only thing, and any information or any engagement with industry that we have is entirely at your choice. Right now, our members request of industry licensees two things. One is what's called an API key. They can pull it from Metric very easily. It's 3 steps that allows us to pull the data from the state's track and trace system. And then the second one is a monthly report of wholesale pricing transfers. And so it's a CSV file or Excel spreadsheet, and you pull the data from Metric. Literally, all it requires is a licensee to identify their transfers and what the pricing of that was. And we understand there's time delays. The system compensates for it. I think it's actually fairly unobtrusive to do, but it's the only way to collect that wholesale pricing data because the state doesn't collect it. And so But that's it. And so, we firmly believe that the voters Prop 64, we asked something of those who engaged in the legal market. We said, you're going to have to jump through all these hoops, right? This compliance is not easy. We understand that. But for that, we will give you a legal market. And, I think as a state, we've not done the best job of creating that environment for the legal operators to operate legally. And we know that by just the volume of illicit sales that continue to go on. And so, we think CCA is part of that solution. That's certainly part of our mission, is to try to deliver on that promise, but also not in a burdensome way. So anyway, happy to answer any questions you might have.
Supervisor Sabatier?
Thank you for the presentation. I know that we met, believe it was in Sacramento, is that where we were? Been all over the place lately, so it's hard to remember where I was, but snuck in for one of the meetings that occurred during our conference. Appreciate learning about the work that you're doing. I'm always asking for more data, and I think today I'm going to surprise some people by saying that's too much data. I think that I'm trying to balance what we need and what we should do. And I think that our greatest failure for our cannabis process has just been, we didn't expect that many number of applications to hit all at once. We had 300, I think, at one point. And staffing has been a problem from before then all the way to now. In fact, we're doing better than ever now, but we still have quite a large number. And I think it's just the quantity, in my opinion, versus necessarily the process, because in some ways, we're currently in Lake County, we're doing a whole lot better than other counties. And we're not maybe at the top of the list, but we're definitely not at the bottom. I won't describe who might be at the bottom. We've been open to the idea in comparison to being closed to the idea, which I think is, again, different than many other counties. And I think that also when it comes to taxes, our taxes, while not different than others, but that data doesn't necessarily provide the assistance we would need. If it was a percentage of taxable receipts, that data is absolutely critical to making sure that we're getting what we should be getting. Since we're taxing the square footage, we just talked recently about using our satellite imagery. I know we're doing annual inspections, and we haven't always been in compliance with doing that, but I think the last 2, maybe 3 years we have, and which is great, we should be. That I think we know what we're supposed to receive. It's a matter of checking in and making sure that people are paying, which I think has actually been a pretty high percentage in comparison to some counties. So I'm not too worried about our taxes. I think we know what we're supposed to get. I don't think our number is, give or take millions. I think it's very much within that room of comfort, of flexibility. When it comes to are people truly cultivating legally and moving it through legal markets to reach the end consumer? While I would love to say that that's exactly where, well, no, I will say that's exactly where I want to be, I don't know how much that data and the reliance on local staffing is where I would like to put the amount of work versus the state. It's a state function, track and trace and all of that. And if somebody's not being honest in track and trace, they're definitely not going to be honest about where they're selling it. And it's hard to know if the data is 100% reliable because it's only as reliable as the data that was entered. But I think that, I know we just had the state come by, review our processes, review our ordinance. Our ordinance is definitely not perfect, but the state definitely sees it as comparison to others as being a decent ordinance to work with. I don't know that this is the product for us. I don't know what the great benefits would be. There was one thing that you spoke about, which wasn't discussed today at the Sacramento conference, and that was the advocacy for the 995 federal tax. Employer tax.
I see what you mean.
What's that number?
Not sure. I'm not sure. I remember the discussion now, to be honest with you.
Basically, you can't deduct anything for.
Oh yeah, the 280E exemption. Yeah, I'm sorry.
The 288?
280E. So it's the Internal Revenue Code, Section 280E, says you can't deduct expenses if you're engaged in illicit activity.
Because rather than using data to figure out how they should be more efficient and successful, I think that should be on them, not on us personally. But advocacy so that they have the same access of federal tax deductions as any other legitimate business would, I think would be the greatest benefit that can happen for our businesses that are struggling because there's nothing that they can deduct at this moment in time.
Yeah.
So that's kind of my position on something that hasn't been discussed, but I know I heard in our meeting.
Yeah.
And I don't know where that fits, and I don't know how that would occur, because I don't know that that's the 130 altogether, because part of the 130 is the access to the data, part of the 130 is access to help us with our ordinance, and I don't know that any of those things are necessary for us, but the advocacy on a federal level so that all businesses can be treated equally is definitely something I would love to support and continue to advocate for. But again, I don't know how that fits within that whole
Fair enough.
offering that's in front of us.
Yeah, so I think the numbers in terms of just pricing that you were provided, membership in the JPA is $28,000 a year. That's it, straight up. The data analytics platform is based on usage. What we do is we do an estimate every year what we anticipate the volume of transactions, because our pricing mechanism that we have with our technology partner is essentially like a gross receipts. And so you're right in the sense that it obviously is very much connected to a gross receipts type of a tax. So the usage is based on that. So based upon your guys' square footage, we did some napkins, sort of back of the napkin estimates of what we expected usage to be, and we fix that for a year. And so when you join, we set what that we anticipate that's going to be, and it is what it is. And then we don't do a true up at the end of the year. We just adjust, based on what we understand for the next year. And that's itself subject to the board. My board sets the mechanisms that we've used to price both membership and usage of the platform. And then the consultants are strictly on a use basis. We have a discount with them that we get for our members on their typical hourly wages, but what we do with that, if you've got a project, whether it's looking at your ordinance, whether it's doing an economic research, or it's doing survey work, we do a scope of work, we get a price worked out with them, and then we provide that to you. If it's good, everybody's happy with what the scope of work says, and what the pricing is, then we move forward. Pretty straightforward. So the only obligation, I guess, of membership is that base membership fee of $28,000. And then in the policy work, we as an organization, we work within the sphere of other local government agencies. We work with CSAC itself pretty closely. RCRC is another organization that we have some relationship with, as the League of Cities as well, in trying to work on those policy pieces. There's lots of issues in the cannabis space, both at the state and federal level. Obviously access to banking is big at the federal level right now. 280E, I think, is a secondary piece to the banking issue. I think a lot of the concern about 280E stems from the lack of tracking data. And so I think as we get closer to having a workable, I don't say there is a lot of banking right now, but I don't want to say it's perfect. And so as the federal government finds a way to solve that problem, then we might get to 280E as a solution, but it's absolutely a huge impediment to industry. And then you have just the state local coordination effort. I think that's probably, if I were standing back looking at the system that we have in place in California right now, it's that lack of effective coordination that's data-driven between the state and local government. I mean, the state until just recently hadn't really been talking too much about local government's data needs when it comes, and we've been in this space for 5 years. And so, that would be, to me, the biggest gap in California's collective approach. Is it is a local endeavor enforcement, because the state doesn't have the resources itself to have representatives in every local jurisdiction that's regulating. And so unfortunately, a lot does just fall on the county. We kind of think that part of our organization's efforts to make that burden easier, but absolutely. Every county's, what's everything I found out too, every county's a little bit different, and so.
Everybody's trying their own thing, and I'll just finish with, I think we have a good relationship with the state. It seems
Yeah.
to have strengthened over the last 2 or 3 years. I'm only guessing and assuming, I'm looking at our Director of
Yeah.
Community Development, that it's gotten better. I know that I have a contact person over at the DCC that I can email and get data within less than 24 hours. So
Great.
I appreciate the level of access that I have. Now, granted, maybe not to the minutia of information that is available through your data systems, but I know I can access what I need when I want, and I'm sure that Community Development has that same level of access to.
Understood.
Supervisor Green?
Yeah, and I know we need to go to the public. So again, we can bifurcate this, and I understand if there's going to be objections to the software. I disagree that we're in a happy space with the state. I'm glad it's improved, and I understand they're going to be rolling out their own form of a transparency project where we can get some limited data, but it's been nonstop frustration for me. We are the boots on the ground. If we don't understand what's going on with our own industry, and then I, Mr. Supervisor, come bugging various departments about how we're linking together our various compliance and enforcement efforts, what do they do with me, and what am I to do with them? Just say, hey, I'm glad DCC's better. So I want to distinguish between DCC and the JPA. DCC is dense. JPA is transparent and public-facing. DCC is slow. It's a state agency. That's the nature of all our state agencies. JPAs are nimble. We can move quickly. JPAs are proactive. The state is what? This 2023, 7 years after Prop 64, and we're just now getting hints that DCC may bless us with some information about the transactions occurring on our own thing. It should not be public records requests. We need to tell the story of our regulated industry to the people who live and work here. That transparency page of that software is the most valuable thing to me. I'm not expecting people to sit there waiting for alerts to come off that somewhere, but we need to communicate to our residents, yes, we have a licensed industry, this is what they're doing. You can actually look up what they're doing right now. And then when we talk about what the illicit industry is doing and all that, we can compare apples and apples and oranges and oranges. And on the policy side, I'm glad that you mentioned 280E. I mean, brush with greatness. I worked on the 280E website with Steve D'Angelo back in the day when he was trotting around the country trying to highlight that issue. But we're not going to solve that. But I do agree CCA needs to expand its interest in policy issues and maybe get a stronger voice advocating with the state, if only because CSAC, RCRC, and even the trade groups. There used to be some pretty good trade groups from industry, and because of the contraction in the market, we don't have the best of representation from industry at the state level. So just taking some ownership of our own industry and connecting the dots. I'll tell you what, I've learned more in 2 weeks of reaching out to the JPA members here than I have in the past 3 years about the state of the industry. And one thing I like about these JPA members is they have connected the dots. San Luis Obispo County has a unified cannabis program that addresses both legal and illegal activities. And although it's a unique model because it landed under the sheriff's office, they have a unified approach. Yolo County, just talk with them. They have not a task force like we have, a citizen task force. They have a task force of department heads, sheriff, treasurer, tax collector, community services is what they call it. And they have a unified approach. And I think their membership in the JPA and their use of the software where appropriate, and not all the people do. Humboldt County is a JPA member. They don't use the software. So we don't have to use the software, at least in year one. But we need to understand how this industry is unfolding, not just here in Lake County, but how we intersect with the rest of the state and what will become a national market soon enough. So I just wanted to highlight that. I think the transparency is hugely valuable. I think the membership in the JPA will force us to think about connecting the dots, breaking down some silos within the county, and communicating that to the public a little bit better than we do right now.
I'm going to guess that, I'm sorry, you looked at me, so I figured that was okay.
Go ahead.
I'm going to guess that the information provided through this is similar to tax information through, what's the state tax agency that tells us sales tax and other things?
CDTFA.
CDTFA? I thought it was a different acronym. But anyway, CDTFA, because I just heard you saying it's something that you're really looking for. I don't know how public a lot of that information will be. That's where I get worried as well, that it's too much information specific to a business. I don't know. I worry about that. And have you spoken to the industry? Because the industry doesn't seem very interested in...
The local?
Yeah, the local industry. Now, granted, we're talking about inspections and compliance, so, I mean, there's a grain of salt to be taken with that. I'm not going to deny that. But I don't feel that a board should be leading the industry. I think the industry should be leading the industry, and we need to create a platform that works for our community, not just the industry. And because I don't want to make cannabis great. I want those who are involved in the business of cannabis to do their part and make it what they can. We're supposed to be the platform for businesses to be successful. That's it.
Okay. I want to take a break so that we can hear from staff. We've got community development and our treasurer and tax collector. And if either of you want to come up and talk about how this would impact your departments, how helpful, not helpful, I think your opinions are going to be really valuable for us if we continue this conversation.
So hi, Patrick Sullivan, Treasurer Tax Collector. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today. And I'd like to thank the JPA, I understand, and Supervisor Green. I know there's been a lot of work put into this, and I appreciate all of your efforts. I wanted to focus a discussion, just my comments on the software and the potential value for the county here. And I think that's where the real question is. I was impressed when I saw the software. I understand all the capabilities it can have. I think my worry is about the value for the county. The primary benefit to the Treasurer Tax Collector's Office comes from the cannabis business tax. That's our gross receipts tax, so that's manufacturing, dispensaries, pretty much everything that's not cultivation. And in that arena, I think the software can be helpful for us. I always have concerns because it's self-reported data, which makes it different than like what we did with host compliance for TOT, where we are extracting third-party data that wasn't entered by the business. This is self-reported, but it is entered across the whole industry. So I think being able to match up the alerts they talked about, that certainly has value, and especially for the audit work we're starting to take on, it could be a benefit. My concern is that we have less than 10 of those business types active right now. The vast majority of our businesses in this county that are cannabis related are cultivation. And with the square footage tax, I just feel like this software might be a limited benefit for us. There's some benefit with cultivation, but it's so primarily geared towards gross receipts. I would worry if we're looking at it from a revenue perspective. From my department's use profile, I don't think I'd be able to justify that cost. We're probably not going to recover the amount of funds, the amount of money that it costs to get the software. So if that's how we're looking at it, I don't think that my department's use alone could justify it. If there's other departments out there that could get a benefit, I think that's certainly something you consider in the future. But from the perspective of the tax program, I'm not sure that this software is the right fit for us. One of the other concerns I had going forward is that the cost of the software, well, it's come down considerably from what I first heard, and getting more into the realm of where I think it might be approachable. A lot of the reduced rate, if I'm understanding it right, is because we have this lower amount of cultivation going on. A lot of our cultivators have temporarily opted out or reduced their cultivation profile. Over time, as that expands, the gross receipts imputed to the increased cultivation area are going to start to drive that cost back up. And I think this is the lowest I've seen it yet, and I appreciate the work that's gone into getting that lower rate. But if this is the lowest and it's going to go higher, and what's going to drive it higher is in our cultivation, that would be another concern. Because again, until we build a bigger inventory of cannabis businesses under the gross receipts model, I don't think my department can justify the cost alone. It would need to come potentially through a combination with other county departments. So those were just my thoughts on it. Again, I think the software is a valuable tool, and one day my program might be able to take better use of it. I'm just not sure we're ready to do that right now.
Just a real quick question, and if Adam is still on, so I'm a little confused. Is it that NCS doesn't currently, has no ability to currently track canopy calculations, or I'm a little confused. Were you not seeing that it had the ability to calculate and track canopy tax calculations versus gross receipts?
Well, I think what my thoughts on it were that because the basis for our tax rate on canopy is just imputed on canopy size, we're not necessarily concerned. This software seemed heavily focused on the volume of transactions that are occurring and the price point and all that, which is totally relevant for, let's say, retail. But for a cultivation model, because our tax rate is that flat rate on square footage, if the square footage is already being verified through inspections or satellite imagery, I guess I'm not seeing where we would make use of this software.
Well, let me ask a follow-up then, because we have, 110 plus permits, but we have hundreds of licenses under those permits. So again, part of what Adam said earlier in the presentation is, you can be looking at a single piece of property, but you can have multiple licensees under a single permit. You can have multiple permits on a property. And one thing I've been noticing, trying to cobble together, is there can be ownership changes or lease outs and stuff like that. So, I get we may not break even or something like that, but I also have a due diligence question. Don't we have some responsibility to understand the whole license mix we have operating under the permit mix that we have, and start connecting the dots of who's declaring what, where, and where that product goes? So it isn't just about calculating and enforcing tax compliance, I think. There's also some due diligence aspect to just understanding basically the economics of our local regulated space.
Yeah, and I understand your perspective on that, Supervisor Green. I think from my office's perspective on the tax enforcement side, I understand there could be multiple state licenses under the county permit, but for us, when we're billing out, we're looking at who holds the county permit, the applicant, the landowner, and we aren't necessarily focused on the breakdown within that. I completely understand your perspective that if you're trying to do a fuller, richer compliance program, that would be relevant and potentially valuable. But right now, I was only speaking from the perspective of my program, the tax program. I totally see how this could have a bigger benefit if we had a broader program. I'm just kind of speaking to how it is right now. Yeah. Thank you.
Director Turner?
Can I ask a question?
Oh, sure.
Mr. Sullivan? I know your focus primarily was on the software. Just a question about the JPA. Do you think that's of beneficial value?
Oh, the JPA in its entirety? I mean, I have to say all of my efforts were focused, my research
Primarily
was
on-
really just focused on the software. And I think a lot of what the JPA does is probably more outside of my wheelhouse because it's bigger policy issues. So I'll probably try to stay in my lane on that one. And
All right, just had to ask.
yeah.
Hello, Muriah Turner, Community Development Director. I was here today mainly to gain information. I attended a webinar when I was just brand new back here and had a few questions there that still remain today. Oh, wrong one. In community development, we deal mainly with land use permitting. The permitting process results in a collection of conditions of approval. Our annual monitoring for compliance is strictly addressing these conditions of approval. We do our annual monitoring in two ways. Most of them are actual boots on the ground on site. We're using radar or laser technology to assess the square footage in the area of the canopy, as well as one of the benefits is we're touring around the area with the permittee, and during that on-site visit, we're sometimes seeing some structures or something, some little things that just need to sort of be brought into compliance. But we can identify small problems as well as large problems, all in relation to the approved conditions of approval. I could see some benefits for policy development in the membership aspect, because it's always helpful to know what everybody else is doing. And so if they're all kind of around the same table, while this policy development at a state level has been such a shifting ground, and so many different counties and cities, we've all been trying to figure it out. And so different jurisdictions may have benefits in that sort of collaborative effort. That I get for the membership aspect of it. I think that would have value as we continue to go through our task force for updating the policy. Not so much hiring somebody to do it for us, because the policy for Lake County needs to be very specific to Lake County. But I could see a benefit in the membership. The rest of it, though, is I still am not clear as how that would benefit community development, either in planning, in our land use permitting, our permit processing, which we still have 2 years of our LJAG grant to bring in additional resources to streamline the permit processing if necessary, or in code enforcement, where, as the board has heard, we're definitely making a difference in the community as far as paying attention to the illegal cannabis. So additionally, when we are doing our annual compliance monitoring, it's helpful for us to either be on site, to be seeing what's there, or to use our satellite imagery to see what was there yesterday, so that we can be looking at the best data that we have possible. I'm not certain that the veracity of the data that would be submitted to the state should a permittee decide to go rogue and be doing unpermitted activity. I don't know if that would be reflected in this sort of system the way it's designed at this point. And so in that level, I'm not sure it would assist us regarding the cultivation monitoring, possibly in monitoring of our other license types. But Lake County is mostly driven by cultivation permits. And so there, I'm purposely vague. I see benefits for the membership aspect. The rest, I think I still need to learn more.
Vice Chair Simon?
Yeah, I appreciate those comments, both from Patrick and from you, Maria, as we're going through. Looking at today's agenda item, that's where I'm leaning more towards. Just, I think collaboration is always great. I think the JPA, I do see benefit in joining as a JPA. We have cannabis dollars that each one of us have in our districts that we could put towards something like this. This is something. But as far as the data collection and those types of things, I'm not there today at this point. But that's my thoughts on it. So, but I think parts of the JPA, because we do that in many different aspects here. I think that collaboration opportunity, and if one of our board members believes this is the direction to go, that they want to get the information, I think trying to find a way to support that and tend to learn. We may not be there. Maybe someday we are there when this data collection information or this platform works for Lake County, but right now I think value in the JPA, at least joining it, but not for the compliance data platform that's offered.
And I was wondering if Stephen Carter would speak to the financial part of this with our ongoing obligations with cannabis funding and what that would look like and where we're at.
So I don't have the newest numbers related to the cannabis tax. There is around 300,000 or 400,000 that is available for policy expenses. You could stretch this to be as part of a policy expense, but that would be a one-year solution. The ongoing expense, with the rate that the property taxes are coming in, well, not property taxes, sorry, cannabis taxes are projected to come in. Most of that is already spoken for with ongoing expenses. So there is limited resources for the ongoing expense of this.
Okay, thank you. Supervisor Sabatier?
I was going to ask Director Turner, I know that you did have a conversation with the state, and I made a statement. What was the state's assessment of our status with our policy and with our processes?
Yes, was it yesterday or last week? Sometime in the recent past, we were in a webinar with the State Attorney General's office for their CAP program, which I forget what the acronym means, but it's basically the Attorney General's office mobilizing to come alongside local jurisdictions and assist them in enforcement with illegal cannabis activity. They told us at that time that they had reviewed a ton of different jurisdictional ordinances and were very pleased with the ordinance that we have currently regarding our enforcement and penalties, which we were really happy to hear.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, I will open it up for the public. If we have anyone in the chambers who wishes to speak on this. And we do have one hand up in the Zoom room. We have phone 1447. If you'd like to unmute and give us your name, and you'll have 3 minutes. Oh, there's the unmute.
Sorry, I think I'm on mute now. Chris Jennings, can you all hear me okay?
Yes.
So I kind of came into a little later on this conversation. I just learned about this meeting last night. I came in when I heard about $28,000 a year for one part of the program, and I look at it as if the county wants to, I'm an entrepreneur, right? So I like everything I can do to save costs. You know, the county's a business. You guys are running the county as a business as you should. I know it's more than 28 grand a year for the data. Metric's super easy. You have an API key that you can integrate into anything. It probably is going to be a lot cheaper just to hire someone to build a platform, how exactly you want it for what the data you need, and to capture all the metric stuff, you just require all the API keys from everyone. I have to do that with my banking. You know, they use standard C, Community First Credit Union, my compliance bank account, and I provide them my API key so that way they can see all my metric stuff, make sure it adds up. So I just think, you know, before jumping into something right away, why don't you price out what it's going to cost to have your own software person create you a program, and then it's a one-time fee, and then maybe a small fee every year to kind of journal maintenance and update it. And, you know, anyone that says that this kind of data is going to change 280E tax deductions is lying. That's not going to happen. State of California used to actually offer 280E tax deduction on cannabis operators. They just happened to take that away a few years ago, probably because of the feds. And you actually do get tax write-offs. You get costs of production. So the farms get the best tax write-offs. It's like a retail owner like myself. I'm a farm operator as well. I can't even write off my employees. So, you know, 280E is going to come down the pipeline when it's federally recognized, and then we'll get all those tax write-offs again. But I just think you should really look into getting your own software people. You just load the API key up for Metric. Boom, you have all the sales that you're concerned about right there, and your satellites are doing the rest. That way you know what size everyone's doing it. And Bruno made a comment about how long we've been doing on-site inspections. This will be the 5th year. Supposedly, if you have 5 years of a perfect site, you don't get to see the county come check you for the next 5 years of your use permit or something like that. So a lot of people should be on year 5 and hopeful that's still the case. But yeah, just please look into bringing in your own software person, writing your own code, capturing your own data. It's an API key. Metric made it where you can integrate it with anything pretty much. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Do we have anyone else in the Zoom room? Not seeing any more hands up. And I'm not seeing, you can come up.
Joan Moss, I would advise you to listen to your tax collector and your community development director. It sounds like you're doing fine the way you are. Was this gentleman appointed by the governor, or is he official? And I understand that the wine industry, people in Europe will not buy California wines. There should have been regulations about what goes into the wine in California.
Joan, that's all.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Okay, so we'll close public comment now, bring it back to the board. I did sit in with Supervisor Spatier when we were at the CSAC Ledge Conference.
That's what it was.
Yeah, that's what it was, yes. And a lot of the topics that were being discussed weren't really pertinent to our county and a lot of the issues that we're having today. So I'm not ready to move forward with either of these today. I don't think that we're in a place that makes sense for the software. I think we can wait and see what happens with the JPA and as other counties join, and maybe it's something that we could do at some point, but that's where I am today. And Supervisor Crandall.
Yes, in regards to the software, I don't think it's a good time right now. However, with the subscription to the ad hoc committee, or the JPI, I'm sorry, the reason I say ad hoc committee is because RCRC has an ad hoc committee that's put together for basically policies to recommend to the RCRC board and to the legislative advocates. And that's what they solely work on. So I think with this membership, it would provide a better benefit for a deeper dive. I know that the other counties that are involved, as Supervisor Green had stated, that are involved with this as a JPA portion of it. So I don't have too much of an issue with that. But as regards to the software, I think we can wait on that. Like, I think, I forgot who mentioned it, but like at a different time, if it's something that could be beneficial. I think Patrick stated that if it's something that fits our, our situation at a future date. But as of now, I think I'm just solely fine with the JPA.
So what's the RCRC advocacy work happening?
So what it is basically, last year we had a ad hoc committee for cannabis. They brought some people forward from the state, Fish and Wildlife, I want to say Department of Water Resources, to talk about illicit cannabis and whatnot. So in other topics, what basically came out of that was policy recommendations for RCRC to give the legislative advocates direction on how to advocate for rural counties as a whole at the state level. When I network with folks at RCRC, it's not really conducive to have those deep dives about cannabis because we're primarily focused on all the issues on the board agendas and whatnot. So I think with this JPA, it gives that opportunity for them to solely, whoever's representing us, to solely focus on that topic of discussion. And so that's basically what they do. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Supervisor Spatier.
And I appreciate you bringing up RCRC. Not certain about the complementary portion of it. I'm wondering if it's possible, because I'm not quite certain that I understand what the benefits are for just a membership without access to the other services. I'd love to hear from Director Turner, who does have a task force and is taking the lead. If there's not a request coming from the task force or from community development for utilizing the extra services, obviously it seems that we have concurrence that there's not a need for that extra level of data. I'm not certain that that I know what the benefits are. Even if it's the $28,000, it's still $28,000 on something else that could be spent. I know that, granted, it's a tiny portion of the entire conversation. In Sacramento, some of the conversation was how do we help to create more retail, and I would say retail's struggling here, and adding more only will hurt the retail that we have. I would suggest that's more of a Los Angeles type of issue where they have pop-up retail, and there's so many coming around that you can't control them. But
Burners.
yeah.
That's what we learned about, the burners.
And that's not necessarily the issue that we necessarily have here. So I'm still struggling to understand if we put 28, I'd like to have a better understanding of exactly what those benefits are. And I don't mind listening some more or continuing the conversation, but at this moment, I just don't see the investment and the return on the investment.
Is there a question?
No, it was more of, if you come to us and you say you want something from the programs that are available in this, or if you go back to the task force and discuss with them what you learned here, and they say we really need help in order for us to move forward with what's been asked of that task force, then I would say then I would be more open to listening and saying, okay, there's a purpose in accessing these programs and services that would be eligible under this JPA. But if I'm not hearing that, again, I'm trying to figure out what's our benefit of putting in the $28,000 if we're not going to access some of those programs.
Thank you. I think that the cannabis task force that the board created with the different membership or areas of specialization is actually very well suited to do the update for policy. What I was thinking about was more along what Supervisor Crandall mentioned, and that as far as policy direction goes, the Cannabis Task Force, the Agriculture Advisory Board, the Planning Commission are all going to bring you recommendations, but the policy making is up to the board. And so the benefit, I feel, in that JPA would be exactly what Supervisor Crandall said. It would be giving the Lake County supervisor, whoever's participating there, the access to all of the different jurisdictional members to discuss specific cannabis policy. So it wouldn't be, like I've got the Planning Directors Association for California counties, and that's a very helpful networking forum and team. And so I get to learn a lot through them. But just like RCRC, you have a full agenda. So the ability to focus and do deep dives and get access to all the different counties, I think would be useful on the board side as far as policy development. I'm saying that because I don't want to have it added to my budget also. So yeah, definitely on the board's policy development side would be very valuable. And we'll keep working on the Cannabis Task Force, the Ag Advisory Board, and the Planning Commission to vet and come up with recommendations specific to Lake County. Thank you.
Supervisor Green?
Thank you. So I think there's consensus, loud and clear, got it. Don't think we're going to do software today. So I'll just withdraw any continued pitch for the software platform, which leaves us to the membership. And I am going to double down. I think we need this membership. I don't just think we need to talk with our other sister counties about how they're doing and what's working, what's not working. I think they need to talk with us. I think we have some good stories to tell. I do think we have some pain points that maybe other people in the state haven't necessarily heard. And even the origin story of the JPA, CCA, it's changed. You know, it's changed. It was originally banking services, now tax compliance and NCS. That was the current thrust. But so many other things we need to talk about. You know, CEQA, land use, what's DCC doing these days, and a whole lot of things that do impact, can and potentially will impact our county. We can learn from others' examples, and they can learn from us. So, and it isn't just, to me, a question of what do we get out of it? What do we get out of it? In a very large sense, we are still paying it forward, all of us, in this grand experiment that is cannabis legalization. And I'll be frank, I think CCA needs to hear from us. You know, it's been a lot about taxes and stuff like that. Certainly the software is impressive. And again, I do like the consulting group. I think they could add value even on top of what is a pretty robust task force, because they're experienced, because they've seen this movie time and again, not just in this state, but in other states. And you can learn from those experiences. So even if it's just a one-off, even if it's just a pilot project, I absolutely want that JPA membership, and that's why I brought this item today, and I urge your support.
So under this agenda item is just direction, correct? And it's, at least, you know, I voiced my opinion for the JPA
As
membership.
annual membership. Yeah.
Yes.
I think we have three.
So,
Bring that back for budget hearings.
Okay.
yeah, so initially, the recommended action is to direct administration staff to prepare a budget. But that budget request is for the annual membership in the CCA. If your board wishes to do so, the joining part of that, the joining of the annual, as an annual member of the CCA would have to be, it's recommended that it be done by motion. And then with the direction to admin staff to prepare a budget. The direction to admin staff can be done by motion or by consensus. But as far as the joining of the membership in the CCA, the suggestion there would be that be done or submitted or recommended by motion.
Well, that would have to come back anyway with an MOU, so the actual mechanism.
JPA is essentially a contract, and so there's a resolution that needs to be adopted by the board either to join the JPA or direct a member of staff to execute the resolution to join the JPA. So does it make sense? JPA is essentially just it's a.
We're part of many different JPAs.
Yeah, so you pass a resolution.
Educate us on that.
You pass a resolution to join a JPA, and so that would be all that you can either have the executive officer sign.
So, sorry, I don't.
No, my bad.
So today's agenda item was just for direction for you to bring back in the budget conversations for joining this. So that's the next step. We got an agreement, at least by three of us as consensus. So you guys have enough direction to bring this back so we can move forward with it?
Yes, we can bring back the resolution, and it is too late to put it in the recommended budget, but during the hearing for a specific budget unit, we can add that expense in.
So was it a motion or consensus on?
Supervisor Spatier.
That was my question.
Oh, okay.
So with that clarification in mind, with the next steps that have been laid out, the suggestion here would be to do the motion to direct staff to prepare the budget request, only because the budget request is tied into this and further action, proposed action of joining the CCA, which is a program, and usually that's done by motion. So it's more really procedural, so it's a motion to direct staff.
And this is $28,000 annually. Is it going to change next year?
It's a decision that the board makes every year. It hasn't changed in a couple of years. So if I have my druthers, it would go to substantially less than it is. But we have a pricing structure in place that the board approves. So,
And which counties are members at this time?
Yolo, San Luis Obispo, Santa Barbara, Inyo, and Humboldt.
Was Mendocino part of it?
Originally, yeah. I think when we went from when we had to go to a pricing model to pay for the overhead running the organization, they dropped out at that point. So they haven't been participating. They passed a resolution, but they haven't been participating since 2020, I think, or 2018.
Okay.
There's nothing further. There's nothing further. I move to direct administration staff to prepare a budget request funded by cannabis tax revenues for annual membership in California Cannabis Authority.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Nay.
No. Okay. All right, well, thank you so much.
Thanks for your time.
And we will break for lunch. We'll take an hour and we will come back at 1:20.